England, 1863. Victorian era. The crystal chandeliers of Beaumont Hall blazed like captured stars, casting golden light across the parquet floors that Violet Beaumont's mother had once walked as mistress. But Violet would not walk them tonight, not as a daughter of the house. She stood instead in the service pantry adjacent to the ballroom, her hands trembling around a chipped porcelain pitcher, the scent of Earl Grey doing nothing to mask the despair that clung to her skin like ash. "Mind you don't spill, girl." Lady Beatrice's voice cut through the clamor of the orchestra like a whip crack. "The Duke of Ravenwood has actually deigned to attend, and I will not have your incompetence remembered on such an important evening." Violet dropped her gaze, the instinctive response of the dispossessed. Though the woman before her wore diamonds purchased with her father's fortune, entertained in her father's ballroom, and commanded as though the Beaumont legacy had never belonged to anyone but herself. "Yes, my lady," Violet whispered. At 21, Violet Beaumont had learned to disappear. The rightful heiress to Beaumont Hall, she had been erased from her own story for 5 years, ever since her father's sudden death had delivered her into the clutches of his second wife. The older servants remembered, spoke her true name in the scullery when Lady Beatrice's footsteps faded. But memory held no authority against a stepmother's fabricated will and an inheritance stolen through calculated deception. "Have you heard about the Duke's companion?" A guest's tittering laughter drifted through the doorway. "They say he brings that ridiculous little dog everywhere. Won't attend without it. How perfectly absurd for a man of his reputation." "Absurd or not, he's the wealthiest unmarried peer in 3 counties, another voice responded archly. "I'd tolerate a menagerie if it meant securing that title." Violet's fingers tightened around the pitcher's handle until her knuckles blanched. The ball itself had been funded by selling her mother's jewelry collection piece by piece. She had been forced to inventory each item last month, recording the sapphires and pearls in Lady Beatrice's ledger, while her stepsister selected which gown to wear with the proceeds. "Violet?" Lady Beatrice materialized in the pantry entrance, her expression venomous with impatience. "Why are you cowering here like a frightened mouse? The champagne service has begun. Station yourself near the conservatory doors and ensure the gentlemen's glasses remain filled. And do keep yourself hidden behind the ferns. I will not have you tainting this occasion with your maudlin presence." This occasion. The words no longer surprised her. Violet had ceased correcting the fundamental erasure long ago. "Yes, my lady." The ballroom was a glittering nightmare of everything Violet had lost. She moved through it like a ghost, pitcher in hand, weaving between clusters of guests who never looked at her face. Why would they? Servants were furniture, useful only when needed, invisible otherwise. The irony was not lost on her that she wore a gown finer than most of the maids, a cast-off of her stepsister's, altered to fit Violet's smaller frame. Yet the golden silk only made her feel more exposed, more fraudulent, as though she were playing dress-up in her own tragedy. "More champagne, if you please." A gentleman extended his glass without glancing her direction. Violet filled it silently, her gaze fixed on the crystal flute rather than the faces surrounding her. She had learned this trick years ago. Look at objects, never people. Objects didn't recognize her. Objects didn't whisper about how far the Beaumont daughter had fallen. The orchestra swelled into a waltz, and the crowd shifted, creating a clear line of sight to the entrance hall. Violet's breath caught. The Duke of Ravenwood had arrived. She had never seen him before. He was notoriously reclusive, declining most invitations, appearing in society so rarely that his attendance tonight had been the primary topic of speculation for weeks. Lady Beatrice had preened for days about securing his presence. Though Violet suspected the Duke's acceptance had more to do with her father's former business connections than her stepmother's social maneuvering. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair and an expression of such profound disinterest that it bordered on hostility. He moved through the receiving line with mechanical courtesy, his responses brief, his posture radiating a desire to be anywhere else. But it was not the Duke who captured Violet's attention. It was the dog. A tiny Maltese, pristine white and impossibly fluffy, trotted at the Duke's side on a crimson leather lead. The creature's dark eyes surveyed the ballroom with an alertness that seemed almost human. And when a matron bent to coo at it, the dog simply stared until she retreated, flustered. "Good God," a gentleman near Violet muttered to his companion. "He actually brought the damned animal. I thought it was merely gossip." "The Duke of Ravenwood does as he pleases," his friend replied with a mixture of admiration and envy. "When you're that wealthy and that titled, eccentricity becomes charm." Violet watched as Lady Beatrice descended upon the Duke with predatory grace, her stepsister Eliza positioned decoratively at her side. The Duke's expression didn't change, but something in his posture stiffened, as though bracing for an assault. The little dog, however, remained utterly composed, sitting precisely at his master's feet, a small white sentinel. "Violet." The hiss came from behind her. Mrs. Greaves, the housekeeper who had served Violet's father for 30 years, pressed a folded note into her hand. "From her ladyship. Now." Violet's stomach dropped. She unfolded the paper with numb fingers. "Retire to the scullery. His Grace must not see you. Your presence will raise questions I will not answer tonight. Do not emerge until the last guest has departed." B. The words blurred. Violet blinked rapidly, willing the tears back. But they came anyway, hot and humiliating, spilling down her cheeks before she could stop them. Of course. Of course Lady Beatrice would want her hidden away entirely, erased even from the margins of the evening. The risk was too great. Someone might recognize her, might remember that Beaumont Hall had once had a daughter, might begin to ask uncomfortable questions about wills and legalities and where exactly that daughter had gone. "Miss Violet," Mrs. Greaves whispered, her elderly face creased with sorrow. "Come away, dear. Quickly now." But Violet couldn't move. The ballroom spun around her, a kaleidoscope of silk and jewels and laughter. All of it taking place in her home, funded by her inheritance, celebrating her erasure. The champagne pitcher trembled in her grip. A single drop of moisture fell onto the note, smudging the ink. She turned blindly toward the service corridor, her vision swimming, and nearly collided with a footman. "Steady," he murmured, steadying her elbow. Violet pulled away and fled, the golden skirts of her borrowed gown whispering against the floor as she disappeared into the shadows where she belonged. The service pantry was mercifully empty, lit only by a single candle. She set the pitcher down with shaking hands and pressed her palms against the rough wooden counter, trying to breathe. Trying to remember how to be small and silent and invisible. But the tears wouldn't stop. They fell freely now, each one a small surrender, and Violet let them come. In the darkness, where no one could see, she allowed herself this single, private rebellion, the acknowledgement of her own breaking heart. My lovely family, before we see what happens next, if you've ever felt invisible, overlooked, or erased by someone who should have protected you, this story is for you. But here's the thing. YouTube's algorithm will hide this from others who desperately need to hear Violet's journey unless you help. A simple like tells YouTube this story matters. A share could reach someone who feels exactly like Violet did in that pantry, alone and forgotten. Don't let them stay invisible. Hit that like button now, and let's make sure her story reaches every person who needs to remember they're worth finding. Violet pressed her forehead against the cool stone wall of the pantry, counting her breaths the way her father had taught her during childhood thunderstorms. In for 4, hold for 4, out for 4. The rhythm had soothed her then, when the world felt large and frightening. It did nothing now, when the world had already swallowed her whole. The sounds of the ball filtered through the thick wooden door, laughter, music, the clink of crystal against crystal. Her ball, her home, her life, wearing someone else's face. She wiped at her cheeks with the back of her hand, smearing tears across skin already blotched from crying. Composure. She needed to find composure. In 6 hours, perhaps 7, the last carriage would depart. Lady Beatrice would retire to Violet's mother's bedroom. Eliza would collapse dramatically across Violet's childhood bed, gushing about whichever gentleman had paid her the most attention. And Violet would emerge from this pantry, climb the servants' stairs to the attic room she now occupied, and pretend that tonight had not happened. She had become remarkably skilled at pretending. Breathe, she commanded herself. Just breathe. But the tears continued their silent rebellion, tracking down her face and dripping onto the golden bodice of the dress that had never truly been hers. Even this gown was borrowed, altered, made to fit a body that had grown thin from too much work and too little food. The silk clung to her frame like a beautiful lie. A sound penetrated her misery, something small and insistent, coming from beyond the door. Violet froze, listening. Scratch, scratch, scratch. Not a footstep, not a voice, something else entirely. Then came the whining, high-pitched and oddly plaintive, accompanied by more scratching against wood. Violet's breath hitched. An animal? Impossible. Lady Beatrice would never permit a stray creature anywhere near her grand occasion. The kitchen cats were locked in the stables during events, lest they offend delicate sensibilities. The whining intensified, joined now by a sound she could only describe as desperate snuffling, as though something small was trying to dig its way through the door itself. Against her better judgment, Violet crossed to the door and opened it a crack. A small white blur shot through the opening. Violet stumbled backward as the creature, a dog, she realized, impossibly tiny and absurdly fluffy, launched itself at her skirts with single-minded determination. It was the Duke's Maltese, she recognized with a jolt of panic. The peculiar companion that had trotted so sedately at his master's side mere minutes ago. No, you shouldn't be here," Violet whispered frantically, trying to shoo the animal back toward the door. "You need to go back. He'll be looking for you. Please." But the dog ignored her entirely. It circled her once, twice, its small black nose working furiously, and then sat directly on her feet and began to whine in earnest. The sound was heartbreaking, a keening note of distress that seemed entirely disproportionate to the creature's size. The Maltese stared up at her with eyes like polished jet, and the whining continued, rising and falling in pitch as though the animal were trying to communicate something vital. "Shh," Violet begged, glancing toward the closed door in terror. If someone heard, if they came looking, if they found her here with the Duke's prized companion, please, you have to be quiet. You have to go back. She reached down to pick the dog up, intending to carry it back to the ballroom and deposit it near its master before anyone noticed its absence. But the moment her fingers touched the soft fur, the dog's demeanor shifted entirely. The whining stopped. The Maltese pressed itself against her hands with a force that belied its diminutive size, pushing its small head into her palms as though trying to burrow into her touch. Then it began licking her fingers with frantic devotion, its entire body quivering. Violet's tears, which had finally begun to slow, started afresh. "Stop," she whispered. But the word came out broken. "Please stop." The dog did not stop. It squirmed in her grip until she was forced to either drop it or pull it against her chest, and when she chose the latter, it burrowed into the crook of her neck and continued its determined affection. Its tongue found the tears on her jaw and licked them away with devoted persistence. Something inside Violet cracked. She sank onto the wooden stool in the corner of the pantry, clutching the small, warm body against her heart, and let herself cry in earnest. Great, gasping sobs that she had held back for months, years perhaps, all flooding out while this strange little creature pressed against her as though it could absorb her sorrow through proximity alone. "I don't understand," she choked out between sobs. "Why did you come here? Why?" The dog whined again, but softly this time, almost conversationally. It nudged her chin with its cold nose, then returned to its devoted grooming of her tears, as though it had appointed itself guardian of her grief. Minutes passed, or perhaps hours. Violet lost track of time in the dim candlelight. The dog never once tried to escape. Instead, it settled into her lap with profound contentment, occasionally lifting its head to lick her hand or nuzzle her wrist, as though checking that she was still there, still breathing, still holding together. "You're going to get me in terrible trouble," Violet murmured, stroking the silky fur with trembling fingers. "Your master will be looking for you. Everyone will be looking for you." The Maltese yawned, displaying a tiny pink tongue, and rested its chin on her forearm with an air of absolute finality. "I'm not leaving," the gesture seemed to say. "I'm staying right here." Violet almost smiled through her tears. "You're very stubborn, aren't you?" The dog's tail wagged once, a small feathery flag of agreement. For the first time in 5 years, Violet felt something other than despair. It was fragile and fleeting, barely more substantial than candlelight. But it was there, the sensation of being chosen. This small creature, belonging to one of the most powerful men in England, had somehow found her in her hiding place and refused to leave. She pressed her face into the dog's fur and breathed. And for just this moment, in the darkness, she let herself believe that perhaps she was worth finding after all. The dog, Pippin, she had heard someone call it earlier, had fallen asleep in her arms. Its small body rose and fell, with each breath a warm weight of trust that Violet found herself terrified to disturb. She sat frozen on the wooden stool, her own breathing synchronized with the creature's, her tears finely dried to salt tracks on her cheeks. She should return it. She knew this with absolute certainty. Every moment she kept the Duke's companion hidden in this pantry was another moment of risk. Another potential catastrophe waiting to unfold. Lady Beatrice would be livid. The Duke would be searching. The entire ball would soon be disrupted by the mystery of the missing Maltese. But Violet couldn't bring herself to move. It had been so long since anything had chosen her, wanted her, refused to leave her. The dog's presence was a balm to wounds she hadn't realized were still bleeding. "Just another minute," she whispered to the sleeping animal. "Then I'll take you back. I promise." Pippin's ear twitched, but the dog didn't wake. Violet closed her eyes, allowing herself this stolen moment of peace. In the morning, she would return to being invisible. Tonight, she would return to the scullery. tomorrow, and the day after, and all the days stretching into an endless future, she would remain erased. But right now, in this pantry, she was seen, she was chosen. She was worth a small dog's loyal devotion. The door burst open. "There you are!" Violet's eyes flew open. Mrs. Greaves stood in the doorway, her face pale with panic. "Miss Violet, you must come out at once. They're looking for the Duke's dog. The whole ballroom is in an uproar. His Grace is—" The elderly housekeeper's words died as her gaze fell on the white bundle in Violet's arms. "Oh, dear God, you have it." "I didn't take it," Violet said quickly, rising from the stool. Pippin woke with a small yip of protest at the sudden movement. "It came in here on its own. I was going to return it. It doesn't matter what you were trying to do," Mrs. Greaves hissed, wringing her hands. "Her ladyship is threatening to summon the constable. She thinks it's been stolen. She's telling everyone that a servant must have taken it, that the household is full of thieves." The word hit Violet like a physical blow. Thief. Of course, that would be Lady Beatrice's explanation. What better way to deflect attention from her own stolen inheritance than to paint the household staff as criminals? "I have to take it back," Violet said, moving toward the door. "I'll explain that I found it, that I was keeping it safe." "You can't go out there." Mrs. Greaves blocked her path. "Look at yourself, child. You're a mess. Your face is all blotched from crying. Your dress is covered in dog hair. And if her ladyship sees you holding that animal, she'll twist the story into something far worse than it is." Violet looked down at herself. The golden silk was indeed covered in white fur, and Pippin had left small damp patches where its nose had pressed against the fabric. She could only imagine what her face looked like: red-rimmed eyes, swollen cheeks, the unmistakable evidence of prolonged weeping. "Then what do I do?" The question came out as a plea. Pippin squirmed in her arms, suddenly alert. The dog's head swiveled toward the open doorway, ears pricked forward, and it began to whine again. That same insistent, carrying sound that had drawn Violet to open the door in the first place. "Hush," Violet begged. But Pippin's whining only increased in volume. "Oh, no," Mrs. Greaves breathed. "It's calling for him." And indeed, Violet could hear it now. Footsteps in the corridor beyond, multiple sets of them, accompanied by Lady Beatrice's shrill voice. "I assure you, Your Grace, we are searching every room." The creature cannot have gone far. Though I must say, it's highly irregular to bring an animal to such an occasion. These disruptions. Pippin responds to distress. The voice that cut through Lady Beatrice's chattering was deep, cold, and utterly disinterested in her opinions. If the dog left my side, there was a reason. The footsteps were getting closer. Violet's heart hammered against her ribs. There was nowhere to hide, no back exit from this pantry. Mrs. Greaves was already slipping away, unable to risk her own position by being found complicit in this disaster. Pippin began barking now, sharp, excited yips that echoed off the stone walls. The footsteps stopped directly outside the door. Violet clutched the dog to her chest and tried to remember how to breathe. The door swung wide. Lady Beatrice appeared first, her face twisted with fury that transformed instantly to shock. Behind her stood the Duke of Ravenwood, his tall frame filling the doorway, his dark eyes sweeping the scene with an expression Violet couldn't decipher. "You," Lady Beatrice spat, her voice trembling with rage. "What have you done?" Violet opened her mouth, but no words came. She stood frozen, clutching the squirming Maltese, acutely aware of how she must look. A tear-stained servant in a too fine dress, caught in a pantry with a duke's prized possession. "Your Grace, I am mortified," Lady Beatrice continued, her tone shifting to obsequious horror as she addressed the duke. "This girl is one of our scullery maids. Clearly she has stolen your companion for some nefarious purpose. I assure you, she will be dismissed at once, and charges will be pressed." "Pippin." The duke's voice cut through Lady Beatrice's tirade like a blade through silk. The dog's entire body began wagging, not just its tail but its whole frame, squirming with such desperate joy that Violet nearly dropped it. She loosened her grip, expecting Pippin to leap toward its master. The dog didn't move. Instead, it burrowed deeper into Violet's arms and licked her chin. Silence descended on the small space. The duke stepped forward, his gaze moving from the dog to Violet's face. With an intensity that made her want to disappear into the stone wall, she saw him take in her tear-swollen eyes, her trembling hands, the protective way she held his dog despite knowing she should surrender it. "Pippin," the duke said again, more quietly this time. He extended his hand. "Come." Pippin whined and pressed harder against Violet's chest. The duke's eyebrows rose fractionally, the first expression Violet had seen crack his impassive facade. "Your Grace, I cannot apologize enough," Lady Beatrice was saying, reaching for Violet's arm. "This girl will be punished most severely for this transgression. The audacity of touching your property. Don't!" The single word from the duke froze Lady Beatrice mid-reach. "Touch her." Violet's breath caught. The duke's gaze hadn't left her face. He studied her with an attention that felt almost clinical, as though she were a puzzle he was attempting to solve. His eyes dropped to Pippin, still determinedly nestled in her arms, then back to her tear-stained face. "What," he said slowly, "is your name?" Violet's throat closed. The Duke of Ravenwood stood less than 3 feet away, waiting for an answer, and she couldn't force a single sound past her lips. Behind him, she could see other figures crowding the corridor, guests who had followed the commotion, their faces alight with curiosity and scandal-hungry anticipation. "She's nobody, Your Grace," Lady Beatrice said quickly, stepping between them as though to shield the Duke from contamination. "A scullery maid of no consequence, clearly simple-minded, as evidenced by her theft of your animal. I'll have her removed immediately. I asked her." The Duke's tone could have frozen the Thames. "Not you." Lady Beatrice's mouth snapped shut, 2 spots of furious color blooming on her powdered cheeks. The Duke's gaze remained fixed on Violet. "Your name," he repeated. Violet. Your Grace." The words scraped out of her like broken glass. "Violet Beaumont." Something flickered in the Duke's expression, recognition, perhaps, though Violet couldn't imagine how he would know her name. Her father had moved in business circles, not aristocratic ones. They had never been introduced. "Beaumont," the Duke repeated softly. His eyes swept the pantry, then moved to the corridor beyond, taking in the grand architecture visible through the doorway. "And this is Beaumont Hall?" It wasn't a question, but Violet nodded anyway. "There is no Beaumont here, Your Grace," Lady Beatrice interjected, her voice shrill with barely suppressed panic. "The estate belongs to me through my late husband. This girl is simply a servant who happens to share the surname. A distant relation, perhaps, though I couldn't say for certain. The lower classes are so careless about such things." "I see." The Duke extended his hand toward Violet. "May I?" Violet understood he meant Pippin. She should hand the dog over immediately, apologize for the disruption, fade back into invisibility where she belonged. But Pippin had other ideas. The moment Violet tried to shift her grip, the Maltese released a sharp bark of protest and scrambled higher up her chest, nearly climbing onto her shoulder in its determination to remain in her arms. "Pippin, behave," the Duke commanded. The dog ignored him completely, pressing its small body against Violet's neck and whining. A ripple of shocked whispers ran through the gathered crowd. Violet caught fragments. Never seen the creature disobey. Absolutely devoted to his grace. What on earth? The Duke stepped closer, close enough that Violet could smell bergamot and something darker, like leather and winter air. He reached out slowly, giving Pippin every opportunity to come to him. The dog merely licked Violet's jaw and burrowed deeper into her embrace. "Fascinating," the Duke murmured. "Your Grace, please allow me to extract the animal," Lady Beatrice said, her hands fluttering nervously. "The girl has clearly done something to it. Some low trick to gain your attention. These opportunistic servants will stop at nothing." "What did you do to my dog, Miss Beaumont?" The Duke's question was soft, almost curious, utterly devoid of accusation. Nothing, Your Grace," Violet stammered. "I was in here, and he scratched at the door. I opened it, and he came in, and wouldn't leave. I tried to make him go back, but her voice broke. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." "She's lying," Lady Beatrice declared. "Obviously she lured the creature here with food, or perhaps she's crying," the Duke interrupted, his gaze still locked on Violet's face. "Pippin responds to sorrow. The dog has never been interested in food, has never been bribable, and has certainly never attached himself to a stranger." He paused. "Until now." Violet could feel the tears threatening again, hot and humiliating. She blinked furiously, trying to hold them back, but one escaped, trailing down her already stained cheek. Pippin immediately licked it away. The Duke watched this exchange with an expression that Violet couldn't read. Then, without warning, he turned to face the assembled crowd. "Lady Beatrice," he said, his voice carrying through the corridor with absolute authority. "This woman is Violet Beaumont?" "A servant who shares the name, Your Grace. Nothing more." "The daughter of Thomas Beaumont, late owner of this estate?" The silence that fell was absolute. Lady Beatrice's face had gone white. "That girl died years ago. A fever. Very tragic." "I'm quite certain," the Duke said, his tone conversational but edged with steel, "that the daughter of Thomas Beaumont stands before me very much alive, holding my dog, in her family's estate, dressed as a servant." "Your Grace, I don't know what lies she's told you." "She hasn't told me anything." The Duke extended his hand again, this time toward Violet herself. "Have you, Miss Beaumont?" Violet shook her head, unable to speak. The Duke's hand remained extended. "Pippin has never behaved this way. In 3 years, the dog has never chosen anyone but me. Never refused a direct command. Never shown attachment to another living soul." His dark eyes held hers, until he found you weeping in a pantry at your own ball. "This is absurd." Lady Beatrice's composure was crumbling. "Your Grace, you cannot possibly believe that this scullery maid, Pippin has chosen," the Duke said simply. He flexed his extended hand, a silent invitation. "Which means, Miss Beaumont, that you are claimed." The words made no sense. Violet stared at him, clutching Pippin, her mind unable to process what was happening. "Your Grace," Lady Beatrice's voice had risen to a near shriek. I must protest this irregularity. The girl is my servant, legally bound to this household. You cannot simply, can I not? The Duke's tone could have cut diamonds. I am removing Miss Beaumont and my dog from these premises. If you have legal objections, you may direct them to my solicitor. He stepped forward, his hand still extended toward Violet. Miss Beaumont, come with me. It was not a request. Violet looked down at Pippin, who gazed back at her with absolute trust. Then at the Duke's outstretched hand. Behind him, Lady Beatrice's face was a mask of fury and fear. The crowd of guests whispered and gasped, already composing the scandal that would be repeated in every drawing room in London by week's end. She had no idea what the Duke meant by claimed. She had no understanding of what was happening or why. But she knew, with crystalline certainty, that if she didn't take his hand right now, she would spend the rest of her life in that attic room, erased and forgotten. Violet shifted Pippin to one arm and placed her trembling hand in the Duke's. His fingers closed around hers, warm and solid and utterly secure. Come, he said quietly, and led her through the crowd. Lady Beatrice's protests followed them through the corridor, down the grand staircase, across the marble foyer that Violet's mother had designed. Guests parted before the Duke like water before a ship's bow, their shocked faces blurring past. Violet clutched Pippin with one arm and held the Duke's hand with the other, her golden dress whispering against the floors she had scrubbed on her hands and knees. The front doors opened. Cool night air rushed in, carrying the scent of jasmine from the gardens Violet's father had planted. A carriage waited, black and crested, with a footman already holding the door. The Duke handed Violet up into the plush interior as though she were made of spun glass, then followed, Pippin still stubbornly refusing to leave her arms. The door closed. The carriage lurched into motion, and Violet Beaumont, clutching a Maltese dog she'd met less than an hour ago, left her childhood home in the company of a Duke she didn't know, with no idea where she was going or what came next. The carriage wheels crunched against gravel, then found the smooth rhythm of the main road. Violet sat rigidly against the velvet cushions, Pippin still nestled in her arms, and tried to comprehend what had just occurred. She had left. She had actually left Beaumont Hall. 5 years of servitude, of erasure, of carefully constructed invisibility, all undone in a matter of minutes because a small dog had refused to abandon her. Across from her, the Duke of Ravenwood sat in perfect stillness, his face half shadowed by the dim carriage lamp. He hadn't spoken since handing her into the coach. His silence was somehow more terrifying than Lady Beatrice's shrill accusations had been. Violet's hands trembled against Pippin's fur. The dog, sensing her distress, licked her wrist in gentle reassurance. "Your Grace," she finally managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't understand. Where are you taking me?" "Ravenwood Manor," he replied. "My estate. Approximately 3 hours north." 3 hours. 3 hours away from everything she had ever known, however terrible it had become. Violet's breathing quickened. "But I can't simply leave. Lady Beatrice will do nothing." The Duke's tone was flat, factual. "She is currently calculating whether pursuing you is worth the scrutiny it would invite. I suspect she will choose discretion." "You don't know her," Violet said, panic rising in her chest. "She won't let this go. She'll send constables. She'll claim I stole something, or that She broke off, unable to voice the dozen ways her stepmother could twist this night into criminal action. "She will not." The Duke leaned forward slightly, and the lamplight caught his features, sharp cheekbones, a strong jaw, eyes that assessed her with unsettling intensity. Because doing so would require her to explain why Thomas Beaumont's daughter was serving champagne at her own ball. Violet's breath caught. "How do you know about my father?" "I knew your father." The Duke settled back against the cushions. "Not well, but adequately. We conducted business together 7 years ago, shortly before his death. He spoke of you often. His brilliant daughter, who read philosophy and kept meticulous estate records. He was quite proud." The word struck like a physical blow. Violet pressed her face against Pippin's fur, trying to hold back the tears that threatened. Her father. Someone remembered her father, remembered her, the person she had been before everything was stolen. "He never mentioned a second wife," the Duke continued, "though I understand the marriage occurred quite quickly after your mother's death. And I certainly never heard mention of a stepdaughter named Eliza." "He married her 6 months after Mama died," Violet whispered. "I think he was lonely, lost. She seemed kind at first." The memories tasted bitter. "He died 4 months later, a riding accident, and then everything changed." The Duke's voice was neutral, but not unkind. "I made inquiries when I received tonight's invitation. Beaumont Hall, hosting a ball for Lady Beatrice's daughter. No mention of Thomas Beaumont's own child. It seemed unlikely." Violet lifted her head, studying him through tear-blurred vision. "You knew, before you even arrived tonight. You knew something was wrong." "I suspected." The Duke's gaze dropped to Pippin, who had arranged himself across Violet's lap with proprietary satisfaction. "I did not expect this, however." "I don't understand what this is," Violet said desperately. "You said I was claimed. What does that mean?" The Duke was silent for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he said, "Pippin came to me 3 years ago. A gift from a business associate who thought I needed companionship. I did not want a dog. I wanted solitude." His mouth curved slightly, though it wasn't quite a smile. Pippin had other plans. Despite everything, Violet felt her lips twitch. The dog did seem remarkably determined. "The animal has been my constant companion since," the Duke continued. "Pippin accompanies me everywhere, tolerates no one else's touch, and has never, in 3 years, shown interest in another human being. Until tonight." His eyes met hers directly. "Until you." "But I didn't do anything," Violet protested. "I was just crying, and you were in genuine distress." The Duke's tone was clinical, as though discussing a scientific observation. "Pippin responds to authenticity. The dog has no patience for social pretense, cannot be fooled by false emotion, and certainly cannot be manipulated by ulterior motive." He paused. "Which means your sorrow was real. Your situation is real. And Pippin's attachment to you is real." Violet didn't know how to respond to that. She stroked Pippin's fur and waited. "I find myself in need of a wife," the Duke said abruptly. Violet's hand froze mid-stroke. "I beg your pardon?" "A wife," he repeated, as though discussing crop rotation. "I am 31 years old. I have a title, estates, and considerable wealth, all of which require an heir. I have avoided the marriage market because I find it tedious and duplicitous. Every woman presented to me wants either my fortune or my title, and most lack the honesty to admit which." He gestured toward Pippin. "The dog has solved my dilemma." "Your Grace, You need protection," he interrupted. "Legal protection from Lady Beatrice, who has clearly manipulated your father's will and stolen your inheritance. You need status that cannot be challenged, resources that cannot be denied, and a name that carries enough weight to crush any attempt at retaliation. He tilted his head slightly. I can provide all of that. Violet's heart was racing. In exchange for what? Marriage, legitimate and binding. The Duke's expression remained impassive. You would become the Duchess of Ravenwood. You would have access to my solicitors, who will investigate your father's will and estate documents. You would have my protection, my name, and my resources to reclaim what was stolen from you. And you would have your heir, Violet said quietly. Eventually. There is no urgency. He paused. I would also have a wife whom Pippin trusts, which is more than I dared hope for. The absurdity of it crashed over Violet, that her entire future was being negotiated based on a dog's preference. Hysterical laughter bubbled up in her throat, but she swallowed it down. This is madness. Perhaps. The Duke's tone didn't change. But it is pragmatic madness. You need sanctuary. I need a duchess. Pippin has indicated you are trustworthy. The solution seems obvious. I don't know you, Violet whispered. No, he agreed, but you know what awaits you if you return to Beaumont Hall. Lady Beatrice will not forgive this embarrassment. Your life, which was already intolerable, will become substantially worse. He was right. Violet knew he was right. If she went back, Lady Beatrice would make her pay for tonight's humiliation in ways she couldn't bear to imagine. I cannot promise you affection, the Duke said. I am not a warm man, but I can promise you honesty, security, and justice. Your inheritance will be investigated. Your stepmother will be held accountable, and you will never be invisible again. Violet looked down at Pippin, who gazed back at her with complete trust. The dog had found her in her darkest moment and refused to leave, had led his master directly to her hiding place, had inexplicably chosen her. Why? She asked. Why go to such lengths for a stranger? The Duke was quiet for so long that Violet thought he wouldn't answer. Then he said, because Pippin has never been wrong about character. Not once. If the dog believes you are worth protecting, then you are. He leaned forward slightly. And because your father once did me a significant kindness in business when he had no obligation to do so, I find I dislike the idea of his daughter being erased. Tears spilled down Violet's cheeks. She didn't try to stop them. I accept, she whispered. The Duke nodded once, as though they had concluded a business transaction rather than agreed to bind their lives together. We will be married by special license within the week. My solicitors will begin investigating Lady Beatrice's claim to your estate immediately. Violet clutched Pippin and watched the countryside roll past the carriage window. Somewhere behind them lay Beaumont Hall and everything she had lost. Somewhere ahead lay Ravenwood and a future she couldn't begin to imagine. Pippin yawned, utterly content, and fell asleep in her arms. And Violet, for the first time in 5 years, allowed herself to hope. Ravenwood Manor materialized from the darkness like something from a Gothic novel. All stone towers and leaded windows, sprawling across a hilltop with an air of ancient permanence. Violet pressed her face to the carriage window, Pippin stirring sleepily in her lap, and felt simultaneously awed and terrified. This was to be her home. The thought seemed impossible. The Duke handed her down from the carriage with the same impersonal courtesy he had shown throughout the journey. A housekeeper appeared in the doorway, a woman of perhaps 50 with keen eyes and a capable demeanor that reminded Violet painfully of Mrs. Greaves. Mrs. Bracknell, this is Miss Beaumont, the Duke said. She will be residing in the Duchess's quarters. See that she has everything she requires. If Mrs. Bracknell was surprised by the arrival of a tear-stained young woman in a dog-hair-covered gown at 3 in the morning, she gave no indication. "Of course, Your Grace. Miss Beaumont, if you'll follow me." Violet glanced at the Duke, suddenly uncertain. He had removed her from Beaumont Hall, proposed marriage, and promised protection. But now, standing in the entrance hall of his imposing estate, she realized she knew nothing about what was expected of her. "Pippin stays with Miss Beaumont," the Duke said, as though reading her thoughts. "The dog has made his preference clear." Pippin, as if in agreement, pressed closer to Violet's chest and yawned. "Very good, Your Grace." Mrs. Bracknell's expression softened slightly as she looked at Violet. "This way, miss." The Duchess's quarters were more beautiful than anywhere Violet had slept in 5 years. The bedroom was done in shades of cream and gold, with a canopied bed large enough for 4 people and a fireplace already lit against the autumn chill. Adjacent was a sitting room lined with bookshelves, and beyond that, a dressing room that made Violet's throat tighten. Her mother had kept a room just like it. "I've laid out a nightdress," Mrs. Bracknell said, gesturing to the bed. "It belonged to the late Duchess, His Grace's mother. I'll have a wardrobe prepared for you by tomorrow evening." She paused. "Will you require assistance, miss?" Violet shook her head, unable to trust her voice. When the door closed, leaving her alone in the vast silence, Violet set Pippin down gently on the carpet and sank onto the edge of the bed. The mattress was soft, impossibly soft, and the sheets smelled of lavender. She hadn't slept on clean sheets in years. The tears came then, but they were different from before, not the desperate, hopeless sobs of the pantry, but something quieter. Relief, perhaps, or grief for everything she had endured, or simply exhaustion from a night that had unmade and remade her entire existence. Pippin hopped onto the bed and burrowed into her lap, a small warm anchor to reality. "What have I done?" Violet whispered to the dog. "What have we done?" Pippin licked her hand and settled into the curve of her body as though he had always belonged there. Violet woke to sunlight streaming through windows she didn't recognize and a moment of pure panic before memory returned. Ravenwood. The Duke. The proposal that was really a bargain. Pippin was sprawled across the pillow beside her, snoring softly. A knock sounded at the door, and Mrs. Bracknell entered with a breakfast tray. "Good morning, Miss Beaumont. His Grace requests your presence in his study at 11 o'clock, if you're feeling well enough." Violet sat up, acutely aware of her disheveled state. "Of course, yes, thank you." Over the following days, Violet discovered the peculiar rhythm of Ravenwood. The Duke was a near constant presence in his estate, but he moved through it like a ghost, appearing in the library while she read, dining across from her in silence, acknowledging her with a nod before disappearing again into his study. He was never unkind, but neither was he warm. He existed at a careful distance, as though they were business associates rather than an engaged couple. Pippin, however, was devoted. The little dog followed Violet everywhere, sleeping in her bed, sitting at her feet during meals, accompanying her on walks through Ravenwood's extensive gardens. When she woke gasping from nightmares of Lady Beatrice's cruelty, Pippin was there, licking her face until her breathing steadied. "You're a very good friend," Violet told the dog one afternoon, sitting in the Duchess's private garden while Pippin chased a butterfly. "The best friend I've had in years." Pippin barked once, tail wagging, as though to say, "I know." On the 5th day, the Duke summoned her to his study. Violet entered to find him seated behind a massive oak desk, papers spread before him. Pippin immediately abandoned her side to greet his master, who scratched the dog's ears absently while studying a document. Sit, please, the Duke said, gesturing to a chair across from him. Violet sat, smoothing her borrowed dress, a simple day gown in dove gray that Mrs. Bracknell had procured from somewhere. The wardrobe promised had arrived yesterday. Modest, well-made pieces that fit properly. Violet had wept over the first dress that didn't hang loose or pinch. The Duke slid a paper across the desk. My solicitor has completed his preliminary investigation into your father's will. Violet's hands trembled as she picked up the document. The words swam before her eyes, legal terminology she struggled to parse. The short version, the Duke said, his tone clinical, is that your father's original will left everything to you, with provisions for Lady Beatrice's maintenance should she remain a widow. A second will, dated 3 weeks before his death, leaves the estate entirely to Lady Beatrice, with you receiving only a small annual sum. The second will is the forgery, Violet whispered. Almost certainly. The Duke leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. The signature is remarkably good, but the witnesses are suspicious. One is a man who died 6 months before the document's alleged date. The other is Lady Beatrice's personal maid. Hope and fury warred in Violet's chest. Can we prove it? With time and access to the original documents, yes. Lady Beatrice will have hidden them well, but people like her always make mistakes. His dark eyes met hers. My solicitor has also discovered something interesting. Your father purchased Beaumont Hall outright. There is no mortgage, no entailment, which means the estate should have passed directly to you, his natural heir, regardless of any will. Violet's breath caught. She has no legal claim at all? She may have a claim to widow's portions, but not to the estate itself. The house is yours by right of inheritance. The Duke's expression remained neutral. However, challenging her will require time, money, and social standing. She will fight viciously. I have no money, Violet said quietly. And my social standing is, she gestured helplessly at herself. I've been a scullery maid for 5 years. You will have money once we marry, and your social standing will be unassailable. The Duke pushed another document across the desk. The special license arrived this morning. We can be married tomorrow, if you're willing. Tomorrow. The word hung in the air between them. Violet looked down at Pippin, who had settled at her feet, his small body pressed against her ankle. The dog gazed up at her with absolute trust. I'm willing, she said. The Duke nodded once. Then tomorrow, you become the Duchess of Ravenwood. And the day after, we begin the legal process of destroying Lady Beatrice's theft. He stood, clearly considering the meeting concluded. But Violet remained seated. Your Grace, why are you doing this? Truly? It cannot be simply because Pippin likes me. The Duke was silent for a long moment, his expression inscrutable. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter than she had yet heard it. I told you that your father did me a kindness once. What I did not tell you was that it came at significant cost to him. He vouched for my character when I was newly titled and under investigation for my father's debts. He had no reason to trust me, but he did. It saved my reputation and my estate. He moved to the window, looking out over the gardens where Pippin had played that morning. When he died, and I heard rumors of a daughter who had passed away from fever, I made inquiries. The story never sat right. But I had no proof, no standing to interfere. He turned back to her. When Pippin found you crying in that pantry, I saw my opportunity to repay a debt long overdue. So this is obligation, Violet said, trying to keep the disappointment from her voice. "This is justice," the Duke corrected. "And pragmatism. And perhaps—" He paused, then shook his head. "We will be married tomorrow. You should rest." Violet stood, curtsying awkwardly. Pippin trotted after her as she left the study, but at the door, she turned back. The Duke stood framed by the window, surrounded by papers detailing her stepmother's crimes, and for just a moment, he looked almost lonely. "Thank you," Violet said softly, "for seeing me when I had become invisible." Something flickered in his expression, surprise perhaps, or something deeper. But before he could respond, Pippin barked impatiently, and Violet slipped through the door. Tomorrow, she would become a duchess. And the day after, she would begin to reclaim everything that had been stolen. The wedding itself was brief and businesslike, conducted in Ravenwood's private chapel with only Mrs. Bracknell and the Duke's steward as witnesses. Violet wore a gown of ivory silk that had belonged to the late Duchess, altered hastily to fit her smaller frame. Pippin sat between them throughout the ceremony, occasionally looking from one to the other as though supervising the proceedings. When the vicar pronounced them man and wife, the Duke, Caspian, she supposed she should call him now, though the intimacy of his given name felt foreign on her tongue, pressed a brief, formal kiss to her cheek. His lips were cool against her skin. "You are now the Duchess of Ravenwood," he said quietly. "No one can take that from you." Violet touched the ring on her finger, a heavy gold band set with emeralds, and tried to believe him. For 2 weeks, she existed in a strange, liminal space. She was a duchess, yes, but a duchess who spent her days in the library with only a small dog for company, while her husband disappeared into his study or rode out to inspect his tenants' holdings. They took meals together in near silence, exchanged pleasantries about the weather or estate business, and retired to separate bedrooms each night. Caspian was unfailingly courteous and utterly distant, as though she were a house guest rather than his wife. Violet told herself it was enough. She was safe. She was fed. She was no longer invisible. The rest, affection, companionship, anything resembling a real marriage, had never been part of their bargain. Then, on a Tuesday morning, Caspian appeared in the library where she sat reading. "I require your presence at a dinner party Friday evening," he said without preamble. 6 guests. Politically influential, socially connected. Your debut as the Duchess of Ravenwood. Violet's book slipped from her fingers. A dinner party? Lord and Lady Ashworth, Sir Edmund Fairfax and his sister, and Lord Chancellor Wickham and his wife. Caspian's tone was matter-of-fact, as though he had announced the menu rather than a gathering of some of the most powerful people in England. Small enough to be manageable, significant enough to establish your position. "I can't," Violet said immediately, panic rising in her throat. "Your Grace, Caspian, I haven't attended a dinner party in 5 years. I don't know the current fashions, the proper topics, You read philosophy," Caspian interrupted. "You managed your father's estate records. You are more than capable of conversing with 6 people over dinner." "As a scullery maid," Violet said desperately. "They'll know. One look at me, and they'll know I don't belong." "You are the Duchess of Ravenwood." Caspian's voice cut through her spiral with quiet authority. "You belong anywhere I say you belong. The question is whether you believe it." Violet stared at him, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Friday evening," Caspian repeated. 6 o'clock. Mrs. Bracknell will help you prepare." He turned to leave, then paused. "Pippin may attend if it helps." When he was gone, Violet buried her face in her hands and tried to remember how to breathe. Friday arrived with terrible inevitability, Mrs. Bracknell dressed Violet in a gown of deep sapphire silk, arranged her hair in an elegant knot, and fastened a simple strand of pearls around her throat. The woman in the mirror looked like a duchess. Violet felt like an imposter. "You look beautiful, Your Grace," Mrs. Bracknell said gently. "Breathe. You'll do splendidly." Violet descended the stairs on trembling legs, Pippin trotting at her heels. The little dog had been bathed and brushed until his white fur gleamed, and he seemed to sense the importance of the occasion, carrying himself with unusual dignity. Caspian waited in the drawing room, resplendent in evening dress. His eyes swept over her, and something flickered in his expression, approval perhaps, though it vanished too quickly for Violet to be certain. "Remember," he said quietly as the first carriage wheels sounded on the drive, "you are the daughter of Thomas Beaumont and the Duchess of Ravenwood. No one here outranks you except myself." The guests arrived in a flurry of silk and jewels and assessing gazes. Violet curtsied and smiled and tried to remember the social graces her mother had taught her a lifetime ago. Lady Ashworth looked down her nose at Violet with barely concealed disdain. Sir Edmund's sister, a sharp-eyed woman named Caroline, studied her like a specimen under glass. Dinner was announced, and Violet found herself seated between Lord Chancellor Wickham and Sir Edmund, with Pippin settled beneath her chair. Her hands trembled as she reached for her wineglass. "I understand congratulations are in order, Your Grace," Lord Wickham said, his tone polite but cool. "A rather sudden marriage, was it not?" "When one finds the right match, delay seems pointless," Caspian replied smoothly from the head of the table. "And where did you two meet?" Lady Ashworth asked, her smile sharp as a blade. "I don't recall seeing you in society, my dear." Violet's throat closed. She could feel all eyes upon her, waiting for her to stumble, to reveal herself as the fraud they suspected her to be. Pippin's cold nose pressed against her ankle, a small, solid comfort. "We met through my late father's business connections," Violet said, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. "Thomas Beaumont. He and his Grace had mutual interests." "Beaumont," Sir Edmund mused. "Of Beaumont Hall? I knew him slightly. Brilliant man, terrible tragedy, his death." "Yes," Violet said quietly, "it was." "And what became of Beaumont Hall?" Caroline asked with false innocence. "I heard it passed to his widow." The trap was obvious. Violet felt Caspian's gaze on her, watchful but not intervening. "The estate's disposition is currently under legal review," Violet replied, choosing her words carefully. "My father's affairs were complex. These matters take time to resolve properly." Lord Wickham's eyebrows rose with interest. As Lord Chancellor, he would understand exactly what legal review implied. "How fascinating," he said. "I do hope justice is served. Thomas Beaumont was a man of great integrity. One would hate to see his legacy mishandled." Violet met his gaze directly. "I share that hope, my lord." The conversation shifted to politics, the latest session of Parliament, tensions with France, proposed reforms to property law. Violet fell silent, expecting to be excluded from such weighty topics. "What are your thoughts on the proposed Married Women's Property Act, Your Grace?" Lord Wickham asked, turning to her deliberately. Every eye fixed on Violet. She felt the weight of their collective judgment, the anticipation of her failure. Then Pippin shifted beneath her chair, his small body pressing against her foot. And Violet remembered her father's study, the evening conversations where he had discussed estate law and business matters, treating her not as a child, but as an heir who needed to understand. "I think it's long overdue," Violet said clearly. "Current law treats married women as legal non-entities, unable to own property or enter contracts independent of their husbands. It's archaic and unjust." She paused, then added, "My mother owned property before her marriage. When she died, my father honored her wishes regarding its disposition. But legally, he had no obligation to do so. She existed only through his goodwill." Silence fell across the table. Then Lord Wickham began to laugh, a genuine, delighted sound. "By God, Ravenwood, you've married a radical. I like her." "As do I," Caroline said, her earlier disdain replaced by frank curiosity. "Tell me, Your Grace, have you read Mill's new essay on women's suffrage?" "I have," Violet said, feeling something unlock in her chest. "Though I found his argument regarding education more compelling than his position on franchise. Without access to equal education, suffrage becomes merely symbolic rather than transformative." "Exactly," Caroline leaned forward eagerly. "I've been saying precisely that. The vote means nothing if women remain deliberately kept ignorant." The conversation exploded into animated debate. Sir Edmund challenged Violet's position on property rights. She countered with citations from common law. Lady Ashworth, surprisingly, joined Caroline's side on the education question. Lord Wickham prodded them all with devil's advocate positions, clearly enjoying the intellectual sparring. Violet forgot to be frightened. She forgot to feel like an imposter. She was, for the first time in 5 years, permitted to use her mind for something beyond calculating how many potatoes to peel or how to avoid Lady Beatrice's wrath. She glanced down the table and found Caspian watching her with an expression she had never seen before. Something between surprise and admiration, as though he were seeing her clearly for the first time. Their eyes met. He raised his wine glass in the slightest of salutes. Violet felt heat rise in her cheeks and quickly returned her attention to Lord Wickham, who was asking her opinion on tenant rights. When the ladies withdrew, leaving the gentlemen to their port, Caroline linked her arm through Violet's with easy familiarity. "You must call on me next week," she insisted. "I host a regular salon for women interested in reform. We'd be delighted to have you." Yes," Violet stammered. "I'd like that very much." Lady Ashworth, who had been coolly observing, approached with a slight smile. "I confess, Your Grace, I had my doubts. Ravenwood is notoriously particular, but I see now why he chose you." She lowered her voice. "You have a formidable mind. Don't let anyone diminish it." When the gentlemen rejoined them, Caspian appeared at Violet's side. "Shall we?" he murmured, offering his arm. The guests departed in a flurry of warm farewells, so different from their arrival. Pippin, exhausted from the evening's excitement, was already asleep in Mrs. Bracknell's arms, being carried up to Violet's chambers. Caspian walked Violet to the foot of the grand staircase in silence. Then he said, "You were extraordinary tonight." Violet looked at him in surprise. "I thought I would humiliate you." "You challenged a Lord Chancellor and won his respect. You engaged Caroline Fairfax, who despises most of society. You made Lady Ashworth smile, which I've never witnessed." He paused. "You were brilliant." The compliment settled over her like warmth. "My father taught me to think," she said quietly. "Lady Beatrice tried to make me forget. But some things, once learned, cannot be unlearned." Caspian's gaze held hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "I propose this marriage as a practical arrangement, a solution to mutual problems." "Yes," Violet whispered. "I'm beginning to think," he said slowly, "that I may have underestimated what we might become." Before she could respond, he raised her hand to his lips, not the formal kiss of their wedding. but something warmer, more deliberate. His mouth pressed against her knuckles, and Violet felt the touch like a spark. "Good night, Violet," he said softly, and released her hand. She climbed the stairs in a daze, her heart racing with something that felt dangerously like hope. "Stop right there. Can we talk about what just happened?" Violet just reclaimed her voice after 5 years of being silenced. But here's what breaks my heart. Right now, someone watching this is living Violet's nightmare. Trapped, voiceless, convinced they're worthless. And if you don't subscribe and turn on notifications, they'll never see how this story ends. They'll never know that rescue is possible, that they can be seen again. Your subscription isn't just for you, it's a lifeline for someone else. Don't let them miss the ending that could change everything. Subscribe now. They're counting on you. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks after the dinner party that had transformed Violet's understanding of her place at Ravenwood. She recognized Lady Beatrice's handwriting immediately, the elegant script that had once penned dismissive orders now carrying poison across the page. "My dear stepdaughter, how industrious of you to secure a title through such unconventional means. Society whispers, you know. They say the Duke married you out of pity, that his peculiar attachment to that ridiculous dog clouded his judgment. They wonder how long before he realizes his mistake. Enjoy your temporary elevation, Violet. But remember, you will always be the scullery maid playing dress-up. And when he tires of the novelty, you will have nowhere to go. I have made certain of that. Your devoted mother, Lady Beatrice." The paper trembled in Violet's hands. She was sitting in the morning room, Pippin dozing in a patch of sunlight at her feet, when the words struck like physical blows. Pity, mistake, novelty. Each one found its mark in the soft, vulnerable places she had tried so hard to protect. Was that what this was? An act of charity that Caspian would come to regret? Their marriage had begun as a transaction, yes, but Violet had allowed herself to hope, especially after the dinner party, after that look in his eyes, after the warmth in his voice when he called her brilliant, that perhaps it was becoming something more. But what if Lady Beatrice was right? What if society's whispers reflected Caspian's private doubts? "Your Grace?" Mrs. Bracknell appeared in the doorway. "Are you quite all right? You've gone terribly pale." Violet crumpled the letter in her fist. "Where is His Grace?" "In his study, I believe, but—" Violet was already moving, her skirts swishing against the floor as she strode through Ravenwood's corridors with Pippin scrambling to keep pace. She didn't knock, simply pushed open the study door hard enough that it struck the wall. Caspian looked up from his desk, startled. "Violet?" She threw the crumpled letter onto his desk. "I need to know the truth." He smoothed the paper, his expression darkening as he read. When he finished, his jaw was tight with controlled fury. "How did this reach you?" "That doesn't matter." Violet's voice shook despite her attempt at steadiness. "I need to know if she's right. Am I a charitable project? A mistake you're too honorable to correct? A novelty that will wear thin?" Caspian stood slowly, his movements careful, as though approaching a wounded animal. "Violet." "Don't placate me," she said, tears burning behind her eyes. "I have been invisible, dismissed, and erased for 5 years. I cannot bear it again, Caspian. I cannot bear being something you tolerate out of obligation." Her voice broke. "If this marriage is only duty to you, if I am only a problem you solved with a ring and a title, I need to know. Please." The silence stretched between them, broken only by Pippin's worried whine. Then Caspian moved around the desk with surprising speed and caught her hands in his. "Look at me." Violet's breath hitched, but she met his gaze. "Lady Beatrice is a liar and a thief," Caspian said, his voice low and fierce. "She manipulated your father, stole your inheritance, and spent 5 years trying to destroy you. Do you honestly believe I would give credence to anything that woman writes?" "But society whispers about everything I do because I refuse to perform for their entertainment," Caspian interrupted. "They called me cold, unfeeling, impossibly reclusive. Do you know why I stopped attending social functions?" Violet shook her head, acutely aware of the warmth of his hands around hers. "Because I am terrible at pretense," Caspian said bluntly. "I cannot feign interest in vapid conversations. I cannot flatter women who want only my title. I cannot tolerate the constant performance that society demands." His grip tightened slightly. "Pippin became my excuse. A dog cannot attend balls, therefore neither could I. It was freedom." "But then you attended my stepmother's ball," Violet whispered. "Because I suspected you were there." Caspian's eyes searched hers. "Because I owed your father a debt and needed to see if the rumors of your death were lies. I attended intending to observe, to gather information, to determine if intervention was warranted." He paused. "I did not expect Pippin to choose you." "The dog chose me," Violet said, the old fear creeping back. "Not you." "Do you know why I trust Pippin's judgment?" Caspian asked quietly. He released one of her hands to gesture toward the Maltese, who had settled at their feet, watching them intently. "That dog was bred for companionship. But he despises most people. He growls at false sentiment, refuses treats from manipulative hands, and has bitten 3 people who attempted to use him to curry my favor." Despite everything, Violet felt her lips twitch. "He bit them?" "Drew blood in one case." Caspian's mouth curved slightly. "Pippin reads people better than I do. He senses authenticity, responds to genuine emotion, and cannot be fooled by performance." His expression sobered. "When he found you crying in that pantry and refused to leave your side, he was telling me something crucial. That your pain was real, your character sound, your heart worth protecting. So you married me because your dog approved," Violet said, trying to keep the hurt from her voice. "I married you because Pippin gave me permission to trust my own instincts," Caspian corrected. "I had watched you for all of 30 seconds in that pantry. A woman in a golden dress, weeping as though her heart was breaking, clutching my dog as though he were the only solid thing in a collapsing world. And I thought, here is someone who has survived something terrible. Here is someone real." His hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. "The marriage began as pragmatism," Caspian continued, his voice dropping to something softer, more vulnerable. "But that night at dinner, when you debated property law with Lord Wickham and made Caroline Fairfax laugh, when you forgot to be frightened and remembered how brilliant you are." He broke off, then said simply, "I saw you, Violet. Not the Duchess I had created for convenience, but the woman you actually are. And she was extraordinary." Violet's breath caught. "Caspian." "I am not a warm man," he said, echoing the words from their first carriage ride. "I do not offer pretty speeches or romantic gestures, but I can offer you honesty." His dark eyes held hers with burning intensity. "You are not a charitable project. You are not a mistake. And you are certainly not a novelty. You are the most genuine person I have encountered in a decade of navigating society's lies. And every day I spend in your company, I find myself grateful that Pippin refused to leave that pantry. I don't know how to do this, Violet whispered. How to be a wife. How to be loved. Lady Beatrice spent 5 years teaching me that I was worthless. Then let me spend the next 50 teaching you the truth. Caspian's hand slid from her face to the back of her neck, drawing her closer. You are brilliant, resilient, and far stronger than you know. You survived 5 years of cruelty that would have broken most people. You retained your capacity for hope, for kindness, for intellectual curiosity despite everything designed to crush those qualities. His forehead touched hers. If anyone in this marriage is unworthy, Violet, it is me. That's absurd, she said shakily. Is it? His breath was warm against her lips. You have every reason to mistrust, to guard your heart, to keep me at a distance. Yet you're here, demanding honesty, refusing to accept less than the truth. Do you know how rare that is? How precious? Violet's hands came up to rest against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her palms. I was so afraid, she admitted. When I read her letter, all I could think was that I'd let myself hope for something impossible, that I'd forgotten my place. Your place is beside me, Caspian said fiercely, as my wife, my duchess, and, if you'll permit it, as my partner in every sense. Not because of obligation or pity, but because I am falling in love with you, Violet Beaumont, and I find I have no desire to stop. The words hung in the air between them, more precious than any jewel. Say that again, Violet whispered. I love you. Caspian's voice was steady, certain, stripped of all pretense. I love your mind, your courage, the way you speak to Pippin, as though he understands every word. I love that you challenge Lord, chancellors, and read philosophy and cry when you're overwhelmed because you're honest enough not to hide it. His hands framed her face. I love you. And if Lady Beatrice thinks she can poison that with her lies, she has vastly underestimated both of us. Violet surged forward, closing the distance between them, and kissed him. It was nothing like the formal peck of their wedding. This was desperate and seeking. 5 years of loneliness and 3 weeks of growing hope crystallizing into this single moment of connection. Caspian made a sound low in his throat and pulled her closer, kissing her back with an intensity that left her breathless. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Pippin was sitting at their feet, tail wagging furiously, looking enormously pleased with himself. I think, Violet said shakily, your dog orchestrated this entire thing. Caspian laughed, a real laugh, warm and unguarded. Probably. He's diabolically clever. He pressed a kiss to her forehead. But I'm grateful nonetheless. Violet leaned into his embrace, feeling the solid warmth of him, the steady rhythm of his breathing. I love you too, she said quietly. I think I started falling the moment you took my hand at Beaumont Hall and refused to let go. Then we're well matched? Caspian held her close, his chin resting on top of her head. And tomorrow, we destroy Lady Beatrice's lies and reclaim everything she stole from you. Together, Violet said. Together, he agreed. The offices of Hartwell & Sons occupied an austere building in Lincoln's Inn Fields, all dark wood paneling and the musty scent of old parchment. Violet sat beside Caspian in the reception area, her hands folded calmly in her lap despite the tempest raging in her chest. Pippin rested at her feet, a small white guardian whose presence steadied her racing heart. She'll be vicious, Violet said quietly. Lady Beatrice doesn't surrender anything without a fight. Caspian's hand covered hers briefly. Let her fight. We have the law on our side. The door to the inner office opened, and Mr. Hartwell himself appeared, a distinguished man of perhaps 60 with shrewd eyes and an air of unimpeachable respectability. Your Grace, we're ready for you. Violet rose, smoothing the dove-gray silk of her dress. She had chosen the color deliberately, dignified, refined, the perfect armor of a duchess. Her hair was arranged in an elegant knot, her mother's pearl earrings catching the light. She looked nothing like the tearful scullery maid who had hidden in a pantry 6 weeks ago. Lady Beatrice was already seated when they entered, her solicitor, a nervous-looking man named Preston, beside her. Eliza occupied the chair next to her mother, dressed in an elaborate gown of pink silk that had undoubtedly been purchased with Beaumont funds. Both women's faces registered shock when Violet appeared. You, Lady Beatrice hissed, her composure cracking immediately. You dare show your face. Lady Beatrice, Mr. Hartwell interrupted coolly. You will address her Grace as the Duchess of Ravenwood, or you will not address her at all. The color drained from Lady Beatrice's face, then flooded back in a mottled rush. This is absurd. That girl is a servant, a thief who ran away in the night. That girl is my wife, Caspian said, his voice cutting through the room like ice. And you will speak of her with respect, or this meeting concludes immediately and we proceed directly to criminal prosecution. Silence fell, taut as a wire. Mr. Hartwell settled behind his desk, arranging papers with methodical precision. Shall we begin? We are here to discuss the disposition of Beaumont Hall and the associated estate of the late Thomas Beaumont. He glanced at Lady Beatrice. You claim ownership based on your late husband's will, dated March 15th, 1858. Is that correct? It is. Lady Beatrice had regained some of her composure, sitting straighter. My husband left everything to me. The estate, the house, all assets. It was his wish that I be provided for. And his daughter received, Mr. Hartwell prompted. A small annual sum, £500. Lady Beatrice's smile was sharp. Thomas was disappointed in Violet. She had become difficult after her mother's death, ungrateful. He provided for her adequately, but no more. The lie was delivered with such conviction that for a moment Violet felt the old fear rising, the terrible suspicion that perhaps her memories were wrong, that her father had indeed found her wanting. Then Pippin pressed against her ankle, and she remembered. Her father's study, his patient voice teaching her estate management, his pride when she mastered complex ledgers. The truth was stronger than Lady Beatrice's fiction. I see. Mr. Hartwell's expression betrayed nothing. And this will was properly witnessed? Of course. Lady Beatrice gestured to her solicitor. Mr. Preston has verified its authenticity. Indeed I have, Preston said quickly. 2 witnesses, both of good standing. The document is entirely legal. Mr. Hartwell opened a folder on his desk. The witnesses being Jonathan Mills and Sarah Fletcher, your personal maid? Correct. Interesting. Mr. Hartwell extracted a document. Because Jonathan Mills died on October 3rd, 1857. 5 months before the will he supposedly witnessed was dated. The room went utterly still. Preston's face went white. Lady Beatrice's smile faltered. That's impossible. There must be some mistake in the dates. There is no mistake. Caspian leaned forward, his voice deadly quiet. Mill's death certificate is a matter of public record, as is his burial at St. Michael's churchyard. He paused. Would you like us to exhume the body to confirm he wasn't mysteriously alive 5 months later to witness your forged will? This is preposterous. Lady Beatrice shot to her feet. "I will not sit here and be accused of—" "Sit down." The command in Caspian's voice could have felled trees. Lady Beatrice sat, her hands trembling with fury. Mr. Hartwell continued as though there had been no interruption. "We have also taken a statement from Sarah Fletcher, who admits under oath that she signed the document at your instruction without reading it, and that you told her it was a household inventory, not a legal will." He slid another paper across the desk. "She is prepared to testify to that effect in court." "She's lying to save herself," Lady Beatrice spat. "Servants will say anything." "We also have the original will," Violet said quietly. Every head turned toward her. She had been silent until now, letting Caspian and Mr. Hartwell present the evidence. But the time had come to speak, to reclaim her voice. "Impossible," Lady Beatrice breathed. "I burned it." "Did you?" Violet held her stepmother's gaze steadily. "You burned a will, certainly. The copy my father kept in his desk. But the original was filed with his solicitor, Mr. Pemberton, 6 months before you married him. Standard practice for a man of property." She paused. "You never thought to check, did you? You assumed burning the house copy was enough." Mr. Hartwell produced a third document, this one clearly aged, its edges yellowed. "Thomas Beaumont's true last will and testament, dated September 1856, witnessed by Mr. Pemberton himself and a clerk of impeccable reputation, both very much alive and willing to testify." Caspian took the document and read aloud, his voice carrying through the stunned silence. "I leave the entirety of my estate, including Beaumont Hall and all associated properties, lands, and assets, to my beloved daughter, Violet Beaumont, to be held in trust until her 25th birthday or marriage, whichever comes first." He looked up. "My wife, Beatrice, is to receive an annual widow's portion of £800, contingent upon her residing elsewhere than Beaumont Hall, which belongs to my daughter by right of blood and inheritance." Lady Beatrice's face had gone ashen. No, that's not. He promised me. He promised you security," Violet said, rising from her chair. Pippin stood with her, a small, steadfast presence at her side. £800 annually, a generous settlement for a widow. But you wanted more. You wanted everything. So you forged a will, hid the original documents, and told everyone I was dead. "You were nothing," Lady Beatrice hissed, her composure shattering completely. "A spoiled little girl who had everything handed to her. You didn't deserve that house. You didn't deserve any of it." "Perhaps not." Violet's voice was calm, steady, stripped of the tears and trembling that had once defined her. "But it was mine nonetheless. My father's legacy, my mother's home, and you stole it through lies and forgery and 5 years of calculated cruelty." She stepped closer to the desk, and Lady Beatrice actually flinched. "You tried to erase me," Violet continued. "You took my name, my inheritance, my identity. You made me invisible in my own home. You called me worthless until I almost believed it." She paused, letting the words settle. "But I survived. And now I'm here to take back everything you stole." "The law is quite clear," Mr. Hartwell said into the ringing silence. "Beaumont Hall and its associated assets belong to Her Grace, the Duchess of Ravenwood, formerly Miss Violet Beaumont. The forged will is void. Lady Beatrice's occupation of the property is illegal and constitutes theft. You have 2 options," Caspian said coldly. "You can vacate Beaumont Hall within 30 days, accept the widow's portion specified in the true will, and face no criminal charges. Or you can fight this in court. where the evidence of your forgery will become public record and you will face prosecution for fraud." Preston was frantically whispering to Lady Beatrice, his face pale with panic. Eliza had begun to cry, great gulping sobs that no one acknowledged. Lady Beatrice sat rigid, her hands clenched into fists. The silence stretched, taut with defeat. Finally, her voice barely above a whisper, she said, 30 days. 30 days, Mr. Hartwell confirmed, after which Beaumont Hall will be restored to its rightful owner. Any personal property belonging to the late Mr. Beaumont or his daughter is to be left untouched. Removal of such items will be treated as theft. "And the servants?" Violet asked quietly. "Mrs. Greaves and the others who remained loyal. They keep their positions." Mr. Hartwell nodded, noted, and agreed. Lady Beatrice stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. She looked at Violet with such concentrated hatred that it should have burned. But Violet stood steady, unafraid, one hand resting on Pippin's head. "You think you've won?" Lady Beatrice said, her voice shaking. "You think this makes you whole again? But you'll always be that crying little girl in the pantry, Violet. You'll always be broken." Violet smiled, a small, sad expression that held more pity than anger. "Perhaps. But I'm broken and free, while you're just broken." She turned to Caspian and offered her hand. He took it immediately, lacing their fingers together. "We're done here," Caspian said. They walked out together, Pippin trotting between them, leaving Lady Beatrice and her daughter in the wreckage of their lies. Outside, the London sun was shining. Violet tilted her face toward it and breathed deeply. "Beaumont Hall is yours," Caspian said softly. "Your inheritance restored." "No," Violet said, squeezing his hand. "It's ours. Everything I have, everything I am, I want to share it with you." Caspian pulled her close, heedless of the passers-by, and kissed her temple. "Then we'll make it a home again. Together." Violet leaned into his embrace, feeling Pippin press against her legs, and allowed herself to believe in happy endings, after all. 6 months after the confrontation in Mr. Hartwell's office, Violet stood in the restored drawing room of Beaumont Hall and marveled at how a place could feel both familiar and utterly transformed. The furniture had been uncovered, the windows thrown open to spring sunshine, and the portraits of her parents returned to their rightful places on the walls. Mrs. Greaves had wept when Violet arrived to officially reclaim the house, and the elderly housekeeper now supervised a staff devoted to their true mistress rather than the usurper who had held them hostage for 5 years. But Violet had not come to live here. Ravenwood was her home now, the place where she had been reborn, from scullery maid to duchess, where Caspian's library held their evening debates and Pippin ruled the household with benevolent tyranny. Beaumont Hall would serve a different, more meaningful purpose. "The architect believes we can convert the east wing into 6 comfortable apartments," Violet said, reviewing the plans spread across the desk that had once been her father's. "Each suitable for a woman and her children, if necessary. The west wing can house the schoolrooms and library." Caroline Fairfax, who had become both friend and co-conspirator in Violet's charitable endeavors, studied the drawings with an approving eye. "You'll need to staff it properly. Not just servants, but educators. Women who understand what your residents have survived." "I know." Violet touched the sketch of what would become a classroom. "I want to hire women who have escaped similar situations, who can teach not just reading and arithmetic, but estate management, law, bookkeeping, skills that grant independence. Your stepmother would be apoplectic if she knew you were turning her precious showplace into a refuge for displaced women," Caroline said with deep satisfaction. Violet smiled. Lady Beatrice is currently residing in a modest cottage in Yorkshire, living on her widow's portion and hating every moment. Her opinion no longer concerns me. It was true. The fear that had gripped Violet for 5 years had loosened its hold, fading to something distant and powerless. Lady Beatrice could not touch her now. No one could. The sound of carriage wheels on gravel drew Violet to the window. Her heart lifted as she recognized Ravenwood's distinctive black coach, and moments later, Caspian emerged, Pippin tucked under one arm. "Your husband appears unable to manage even a few hours without you," Caroline observed dryly. "We've been apart since breakfast," Violet replied, already moving toward the door. "Practically an eternity." She met Caspian in the entrance hall, the same hall where she had once served champagne to guests who never saw her face. He set Pippin down, and the dog immediately raced to Violet, jumping and spinning in circles of joy. "Traitor," Caspian said mildly to the dog. "I've been your companion for 3 years, and still you prefer her." "He has excellent taste." Violet scooped Pippin into her arms, then rose on her toes to kiss her husband. "You're early." "I finished my business in the city ahead of schedule." Caspian's arms came around her waist. "And I find I'm constitutionally incapable of staying away from you for extended periods. It's becoming a problem." "A terrible affliction," Violet agreed, smiling against his mouth. Caroline appeared in the doorway, gathering her papers. "I'll leave you two to your afflictions. Violet, I'll send the list of potential instructors by the end of the week." She paused, her expression softening. "What you're doing here, it matters. You're giving women what you nearly lost, the chance to reclaim themselves." When Caroline had departed, Caspian walked with Violet through the restored rooms of Beaumont Hall. His hand remained at the small of her back, a constant warm presence. "I remember the first time I came here," Caspian said as they entered the ballroom where everything had begun. "To that wretched ball. I was prepared to observe from the margins, gather information, and leave. I certainly didn't expect a small dog to upend my entire existence." Pippin, trotting between them, sneezed as though in commentary. Violet looked up at the chandeliers that had blazed while she served champagne with trembling hands. "I remember standing right there, trying to be invisible, convinced I deserved everything Lady Beatrice did to me." She turned to Caspian. "And then Pippin found me, and you followed, and everything changed." "Not everything." Caspian drew her closer. "You were already brave, already brilliant. I simply gave you the space to remember it." "You gave me everything," Violet said quietly. "Safety, purpose, love. A life I had stopped believing was possible. And you gave me something I didn't know I needed." Caspian's hand came up to cup her face with infinite gentleness. "Do you know what my life was before you? Solitary, efficient, completely devoid of joy. I told myself I preferred it that way, that emotional connection was a weakness I couldn't afford." "And now?" Violet asked, though she could see the answer in his eyes. "Now I wake up to find you reading philosophy in bed, debating imaginary opponents and making notes in the margins. I come home to discover you've invited half of London's reform-minded women to tea and accidentally started a political movement. I watch you play with Pippin in the garden and laugh at absolutely nothing. And I think..." His voice caught. "I think I have never been happier, never felt more alive." Tears pricked Violet's eyes, but they were good tears, cleansing rather than painful. "I love you. So much it terrifies me sometimes." "Good." Caspian pressed his forehead to hers. "Because I am wildly, irrevocably in love with you, Violet Valerius. Duchess of Ravenwood, formerly Beaumont, survivor of cruelty, champion of the displaced, and the bravest woman I have ever known." He pulled back slightly, his dark eyes searching hers. "Pippin found you weeping in a pantry, but you found yourself. That's the miracle." Violet kissed him then, pouring 5 years of sorrow and 6 months of healing into the connection between them. Pippin, apparently deciding this was taking too long, barked sharply and pawed at Caspian's leg. They broke apart, laughing. "He's jealous," Violet said, crouching to scratch the dog's ears. "Poor Pippin. Are we neglecting you?" Pippin's tail wagged furiously, and he licked her face with devoted enthusiasm. "You know," Caspian said, watching them with an expression of profound contentment, "when I received that dog 3 years ago, I thought it was the most pointless gift imaginable. A tiny, absurd creature that would require constant attention and give nothing in return. And now? Now I think Pippin is the wisest creature I've ever met." Caspian crouched beside Violet, one hand stroking the dog's silky fur. "He knew what I needed before I did. He found you when I would have missed you entirely. He refused to let you remain invisible." Violet looked at the small white dog who had changed everything. This tiny miracle who had seen her sorrow and refused to abandon her to it. "Thank you, Pippin," she whispered, "for being stubborn, for following your heart to a pantry, for saving me." Pippin barked once as though to say, "You're welcome," and promptly fell asleep in her lap. That evening, they hosted a small dinner at Ravenwood. Caroline and her brother Edmund, Lord Wickham and his wife, and a handful of other allies in Violet's growing network of reformers. The conversation was lively, ranging from property law to educational theory, to the shocking idea that women might someday serve in Parliament. Violet presided over her table with confidence, her ideas challenged and refined by minds that respected her intellect. Caspian watched from the head of the table with undisguised pride, occasionally catching her eye and smiling in a way that made her heart race. After the guests departed, they walked through Ravenwood's gardens in the soft darkness, Pippin investigating every interesting scent with determined focus. "I've been thinking," Caspian said, his arm around Violet's waist, "about the future, about what comes next for us." Violet leaned into his warmth. "And? I want to travel with you, show you the world beyond England. I want to watch you debate philosophers in Paris and examine ancient law in Rome. I want to see you experience everything you were denied." He paused. "And eventually, when we're ready, I want to fill Ravenwood with children who grow up knowing their mother is brilliant and their father is besotted, and that unconventional families built on love are the strongest kind." Violet stopped walking, turning to face him fully. The moonlight caught the planes of his face, the gentle strength that had saved her. "That sounds perfect. You sound surprised." "I am, a little." Violet touched his cheek. 6 months ago, I was convinced I would die in that attic room, forgotten and erased. The idea that I could have this, travel, purpose, children, love, it seemed as impossible as flying. And now? Now I believe in impossible things. Violet smiled. "I believe a small dog can sense sorrow. I believe a duke can fall in love with a scullery maid. I believe broken things can be mended and stolen lives reclaimed." She kissed him softly. "I believe in us." Caspian gathered her close, and they stood in the garden as the stars emerged overhead and Pippin chased moths through the lavender. "Do you ever regret it?" Violet asked quietly. "The convenience marriage that became something more complicated?" "Never." Caspian's answer was immediate and absolute. You are the best thing Pippin ever found for me. The best decision I ever made. The greatest gift I never knew to ask for. He tilted her chin up. You transformed me, Violet. Made me believe that solitude isn't safety, that love isn't weakness, that letting someone see you completely is the bravest thing a person can do. You did the same for me, Violet whispered. You saw me when I was invisible. You believed in me when I'd forgotten how. You loved me when I thought I was unlovable. Then we saved each other, Caspian said simply. Pippin just facilitated the introduction. They stood together in the moonlight, the Duke and Duchess of Ravenwood, bound by unconventional beginnings and sustained by love that had bloomed in the most unlikely soil. Pippin settled at their feet with a contented sigh, his work complete. And Violet, looking up at the stars above her true home, finally allowed herself to believe in happy endings, not because they were guaranteed, but because she had fought for hers and won. My beautiful family. Violet's story ended with hope, but only because someone refused to let her stay invisible. Now I have a question for you. How many people are scrolling past this video right now, living in their own version of that pantry, convinced no one sees them? If this story touched you, if Violet's journey meant something, you have a responsibility. Share this video. Not for me, for the person in your life who needs to hear that broken things can be mended, that stolen lives can be reclaimed, that they are worth finding. You found this story. Now make sure it finds them. Like this video, subscribe to this channel, and share it now. Someone's waiting. At the end of this video, you'll see a suggestion for another powerful story from our channel. Click it and let yourself be surprised by even more unforgettable emotions with love. The Victorian Royal Stories team.